Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. Mike Niziolek looking at his computer, Bloomington Herald Times. Purdue 87, Indiana 66. I mean, about as bad as Indiana's played in this rivalry, certainly in this building in a while. I think I saw this was like the Purdue's heaviest win here in Bloomington since the 30s. And really, I think it's fair to say all of what really kind of needed to be known about this game happened in the first 20 minutes. Indiana got in foul trouble. Indiana's management of Zach Edey was poor. I think more than that, Indiana's management of Purdue's surrounding pieces, coupled to basically who got in foul trouble guarding Edey, was poor. Purdue was up 22 at half. They outshot Indiana in the first half. I'm trying to find it. I think it was 14 of 16 to 1 of 2 at the free throw line.
Yeah.
Indiana missed, in fairness, some decent threes, but probably not the ones they hit when they do make shots in the first half, and that was pretty much the ball game.
Well, we've talked about that if this team gets down by not much, that they don't have the firepower to do it, especially with Xavier Johnson, which we talked about there, playing really poorly. Mackenzie Mbako having to sit for so long in the first half because of the foul trouble just kind of totally took him out of the game, rhythm-wise, because you've seen him play well. You've seen him, and he did tonight, hit a three-pointer right from the start, kind of gets feeling it, and then, he just sort of lost that momentum. Really just the perfect storm in the first half. I think you tweeted that if you were going to take two players from the floor, probably the worst two were Mackenzie and Khalil, just because Khalil kind of was the center of the defensive effort against Edey, and Mackenzie was kind of the offense, provided something different.
He was the one that you didn't know how Purdue was going to cover.
Right.
Like, and you didn't know who on Purdue was really going to be able to manage Mackenzie and Mbako.
And after his start, that kind of proved out to be, they struggled with him.
And he was also Indiana's second leading scorer on the night, so like once he got back on the floor, he made a difference too.
Yeah, and so really just the perfect storm. Gabe Cupps was also in foul trouble throughout the night. And once they went down by 20, they do show some life in the second half, cut it within the 9, but you just never felt like they were going to get back in it because they had to play essentially perfect basketball in the second half. Right. And this team has not played perfect basketball for longer than stretches of like 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, there's a few things to unpack. First of all, Khalil Ware, the foul trouble early, and Mike Woodson was willing to concede he should have brought Mackenzie Mbako back in. He did not say he should have brought Khalil Ware back in, and I think there's an extent to which he felt like Khalil Ware really was not meeting the challenge of Zach Edey, and I said this to somebody at halftime.
One of the things much easier him picking a third foul up.
Well, but one of the things that Trace Jackson Davis was actually quietly good at with Zach Edey was just kind of knowing when to let him go. And knowing when to just say, fair enough, he's going to get his dunk. Well, like I looked at this last year, Edey went for, I think, 33 and 18 in this building. The difference in that game was only one other Purdue player scored in double figures. That was Fletcher Lawyer, and he was something like 4 of 12 from the floor with 12 points. The point is, Indiana was able to compartmentalize Edey's impact. He didn't get people in foul trouble. He didn't bring others into the game. They didn't the game plan didn't lopside so heavily against him because suddenly Indiana felt like, well, it's Peyton Sparks or it's Malik Renew. Somebody's given up a ton of size to Zach Edey, so we've got to do all these hard doubles, and that's going to lead to ball reversal. And Purdue really actually didn't make a ton of threes. They only made 7. They made 5 of them in the first half. It was more the fact that kind of where picked up the wrong kinds of fouls very quickly against Edey.
Well, and
Indiana didn't really have
hold him aside, and I think that's what he said. He's like, this isn't the point to be doing that. Playing him so hard where you're slapping at the ball or slapping up. You got to play off him a little bit to kind of preserve yourself. If you give up a basket with 7 minutes into the game, that's okay, as long as you don't pick up that foul. And I think that was his message. Obviously too late, but
because Ware's length actually did seem to bother. I mean, Edey was 11 of 23, which isn't horrible, but it's not like his most efficient performance in the world either. Ware's length did seem to be a little bit weird to Edey because I don't think he's used to having.
But once he sort of settled down late in the second half, he seemed to have less of an issue with it.
Yeah,
but it might have worn him down a little more if he had to go up against him because Malik Renew was totally overmatched. I think in that matchup defensively,
and also probably got to a point where you feel like, I can't pick up any fouls here because if I go off the floor, then there's nothing. Woodson did admit, he said I don't like, kind of second guessing myself, which you understand as a coach, but he did pretty much flat out say I should have gone back to Mackenzie Mbako. We brought him back with 2 fouls late in the first half, like maybe 2.5 minutes to go.
It was already past their run, and they had already pushed the lead up to almost 19 points at that point. So,
yeah.
You had to stem the bleeding earlier because, you couldn't erase – this team is not built to erase large, I think 15, anything over 15 right now is really going to be impossible for this team to sort of cut in the, going into the second half.
And there was, an extent to which, whether it's the way they managed the end of that first half where Purdue was only up, I won't say only up, they were 15, 16, and Indiana had a couple of just really weak possessions where it felt like they just kind of sort of mailed in the last minute and a half of that first half. Just they almost felt stunned. The building did too. Xavier Johnson, another flagrant foul. This one a flagrant one, but another one that's pretty clear on review. It's fair to say that first half, it exposed kind of everything about Indiana. It exposed their shortcomings as a team. It exposed maybe, I think, some fears people have had around, at least visibly on-court leadership from some of this team's, more experienced players, its captains. It exposed the limitations this team has when key guys get into foul trouble. It is just a really difficult, as you said, the needle for Indiana to thread, they cannot make it too narrow for themselves because this team is limited in both tangible and intangible ways.
Yeah, and the three-point shooting, the minute it turns on, they cut the lead back into manageable to try to get into it, but they're just so streaky and they're not talented. They don't have enough shooters to be able to sort of whittle a team down because it's possession after possession of not making mistakes. And you mentioned Xavier Johnson. What do you do with him kind of going forward? I think that's a big question. He came off the bench again tonight, was 0 for 5, I think. 0 for 2 from three-point range, had a couple key turnovers, one of which was that flagrant foul, almost was a 6-point possession. I think he's a big question mark going forward because when that game where he played well and finally found his footing, this team looked good, and the last two games, he's been just a complete non-factor.
And I think, too, the thing that could have gotten Indiana back in this is Purdue's had some real issues with turnovers in recent games, and they only committed 8. Indiana actually wasn't terrible on the offense or the defensive glass. Purdue had 11 offensive rebounds. That's low for them. They were 14-7 in second chance points. But like we said before the game, Purdue's going to get some second chances. You just have to live with that. What you had to do was find a ways to leverage what Purdue does not do well. And one of the things that Purdue has really struggled with lately for the team as good as it is turnovers. He only had 8 tonight. That was where it felt like, when they got that lead down to 9, a couple different times in the second half, and they should be commended. They played really well, for the first 6-7 minutes of the second half. They clearly came out with a point to prove. Whatever the message was at halftime, it clearly translated across. But you felt like what was going to get Indiana from, maybe making Purdue nervous to really getting Purdue in a spot where they felt like they were out of control was forcing some mistakes. And Purdue was not able to do that consistently and certainly wasn't able to capitalize on the ones they did. Indiana only scores 12 points off 8 Purdue turnovers. That number ultimately needs to be higher for a team that doesn't have the efficiency margin offensively, as we've discussed. It wasn't a very good game for Indiana. It was a really bad first half. They deserve some credit for trying to pull themselves back together in the second, but ultimately they dug themselves way too deep in the hole.
Well, Zach Edey's like the ultimate run stopper, right? There's only so many.
The thing is, that's kind of what Indiana's was good at last year with Edey was, I think I had this in one of my stories. He went for 56 and 36 against Indiana in 2 games. But what Indiana didn't do was let any other part of Purdue's offensive sort of structure really find its legs. And some of that was obvious Purdue shortcomings. They were a really poor three-point shooting team last year compared to where they are now. But it was kind of this idea that, Purdue needed to ride Edey rather than using Edey, as you say, as kind of the, okay, we need some momentum. We need to kill the crowd.
And it's they go on an 8-0 run, and then it goes to him 3 straight times, and he got fouled once and hit 2 baskets. It's that's just...
Whereas, last year, it was more like they were doing that just to try and get... offense, trying to stay within the flow of the game. Yeah. And so, just a bad night for Indiana. On a night when Indiana, we joke about this on the podcast, but Indiana probably really needed this game because they don't have,
some might say it was a must win.
They just don't have many chances. They really, unless they're going to do something unexpected on the road.
Well, with their schedule the way it is, back-to-back road games are tough. They have 3 of those. 3 kind of series, and that team hasn't played well on the road. You needed to find a quality win at home, and those opportunities are running out. And now you can't let this have a hangover. I think this will be a true test of where you're going on the road. Mike Woodson's going to have to sort of figure some things out here in short order to get this team kind of the ship righted.
we'll leave it there for now. Indiana's 12-6, 4-3 in the Big Ten. They're at Wisconsin on Friday night, and then they've got a week and a day off before they go to Illinois for the first of those 3 road back-to-backs. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman from the Herald Times, the Star. Thank you so much for watching. Talk to you soon.